Hello and welcome. You're currently watching this virtual unit preview because you're planning first grade reading this upcoming school year, or you are a school leader looking to learn more content. So if you were with us last year, you're aware that these virtual unit previews are new resources for our teachers, and I'm very excited to share it with you. Before we begin, I want to introduce myself. My name is Alicia McClung, and I have included here a selfie from my summer trip to Alaska. Just a little bit about me. I'm originally from Dallas and was raised here. I came back to Dallas after college and joined Uplift with Teach for America in the fall of 2013. Because my first year teaching was also Triumph's first year open, I'm a founding educator. So this will be my 5th year teaching and actually my 2nd year as the first grade reading CTL. And I'm very excited to be with you today. So I want to begin by looking at Uplift's course Vision of Excellence for Primary Literacy. So this is available in the first grade Blackboard course under Curricular Resources, Course Visions, and Supporting Documents. I highly suggest pausing this video and reviewing this document. Here I've included the opening summary. What sticks out the most to me is the focus on scholars to have deep discussions about their texts and being able to explain their thinking and writing. So these ultimately are the output aims for our scholars to ensure the comprehension and really should be at the forefront of your thinking when planning your reading lessons for this school year. So with the course vision briefly reviewed, I can now start our very first virtual unit preview. So these are designed to help teachers really understand what is coming up in the unit and give you guys a long-term goal of what we want scholars to know by the end of the unit. So basically it's showing the teacher backward planning steps to help you lesson plan effectively. And so the unit preview will also help you adjust to some of the changes in what materials CTLs provide, as well as look at the unit in a big picture context. So let's talk a little bit about the scope and sequence for first grade reading. Any returning Uplift teachers will notice that the document really has had only minor changes from last year. Please note that pacing is listed as 6 weeks and is broken down into 24 instructional days and 5 flex days. So this is a fiction unit. Within the progression of readiness teaks, you'll see in the middle the 3 readiness teaks for first grade. Ultimately in this unit we will teach plot, retelling, analyzing characters, as well as getting scholars to ask questions and locate details in the text. This box in the middle is a good starting point for differentiation. So for your higher scholars, you could push their thinking by planning guided reading lessons, CFUs, and writing prompts that address those 2nd grade teaks that are aligned. So now I can introduce the first unit at a glance. So this is located in the reading link under Unit at a Glance and Unit Previews. Although if you're watching this video, it was located in the same folder, so you may have already taken a peek at it. Using the list of teaks from the scope and sequence and the suggested pacing, I've built a Unit at a Glance document for Unit 1. The information provided in each unit at a glance has changed, so please note this. Previously, the Unit at a Glance had actual calendar days, so now there's actually more of a suggested duration for how long to spend on each objective. And this is noted as the column titled Pacing Notes. Each objective is listed in a sequential order, along with the corresponding teaks to the left, potential misconceptions, and the aligned objective assessment. For Unit 1, I've sorted the objectives into 4 categories or sections, and I've listed them here. My plan for the next few slides is to deep dive into each of these sections. So the first section of the unit is titled, Off We Go, Readers Go on Adventures. So we'll begin with an introduction to what a character is and how to identify one. But really, based on your week 0 plans and the reading levels of your scholars, this lesson could be done in week 0 or just not at all. It's up to you and what your scholars need. Next, scholars will learn how to preview a fiction book. So I included this objective this year because I wanted scholars to learn early on what they need to look for and think about when they first pick up a fiction book. The preview will center on the characters, figuring out where the characters are going and what they're doing. It's important to understand with this objective that scholars are not actually reading the text to preview it, but just using the pictures. The aim here is to shift scholars from labeling this as a picture walk to describing the action as previewing the story. Next, scholars will learn how to describe the setting of the story. Again, the focus here is just naming where and when the story is taking place. After they've learned how to preview the story and learn how to keep track of where and when, scholars move on to learning how to make predictions. Scholars will need to stop at certain points of a book and pay attention to what's happening in the story to predict what might happen next. And lastly, to wrap up this first section of the unit, we will return back to previewing and figuring out the setting, but completing both tasks with one story. The aim here is for scholars to continue this skill during guided reading whenever they pick up a fiction book. You as the teacher should be able to put a fiction book in front of them during guided reading, ask them to preview the book and figure out the setting, and they automatically know what they need to look for and discuss with you, just as they've practiced during Read Aloud of week 1. Now moving on to section 2, and this is titled Readers Meet Characters Along the Way. The aim for this section is for scholars to analyze the characters that they find in their fiction stories. We'll begin by learning how to identify the main character of a story and how to collect details about them as we are reading. I've chosen to spend 2 days on this objective so that the scholars have practiced finding and describing main characters in 2 different texts. It's crucial that when scholars are reading with you during guided reading that they are again practicing identifying and describing the main character. Next, we move on to character traits. If you use my lesson plans from last year, you'll notice that I have gone about teaching character traits this year in a very different way. We'll actually describe finding character traits as quote-unquote getting to know the character better. Now scholars will try to get to know the characters better by paying attention to their relationship with other characters. My hope here is that by thinking about the character and how they're interacting with others, scholars can pull out those character traits such as being caring or helpful or being a bad sport and things of this nature more easily. We'll practice this skill again for 2 days, getting practice with 2 different texts. After this, scholars will continue figuring out character traits, but not by paying attention to their relationships with others, but by rereading the story and paying attention to what the character says and what they do throughout the story. The 2 books used for the last objective will be used again so that they may actually participate in the rereading. It's important that scholars are backing up their claims for character traits with very specific words and actions from the character. We also want them to understand that any adjective describing a character is a character trait. Scholars don't actually have to discern physical traits from personality traits until later grades. And lastly, I have an objective that I'm really excited about and actually haven't tried before. Students will be able to describe what else characters might say or think across the story, justifying it with a character trait. Ultimately, we're pushing scholars to think about what else a character may say or think based on their character trait. An example of this, very loosely, would be if we see a character that's nervous or shy to start school, we can intelligently guess that they might ask their teacher if they could call home and talk to their mother so that they could feel better. This might be a tricky objective for scholars, but I'm excited to see what they come up with. And the third section of Unit 1 is all about character feelings and problem and solution. You'll notice right off the bat that 2 objectives in this section are highlighted in a bluish color. This is because for both of these objectives, I have created annotated model lessons. These can be found on Blackboard and used to help create your own lesson plans. Now, to begin our deep dive of this section, I've started this section with an objective that teaches how to change your voice for a character to show their feelings. As noted, this should actually be a shared reading experience instead of a read aloud, so that scholars can see the text that need to be read in a certain way to show a character's feelings. We're ultimately teaching scholars how to use expression when reading. So after this introduction to expression, scholars will learn how to change their voice when the character's feelings change. So we want scholars to understand that if a character feelings change from happy to sad, then we need to change our voice to show that different feeling. Now, once this introduction to expression and character feelings is completed, we move on to identifying the problem and solution. Once scholars have a firm grasp on how to identify the problem and solution, we move on to explaining why a character's feelings change. We are teaching this right after problem and solution because we want their explanations about why a character feelings change to be rooted in the problem and solution. And lastly, we'll end the section with scholars describing the plot of the story. So when you ask scholars to describe the plot of a story, we want them to describe 4 things: the setting, the characters, problem, and solution. And this really shouldn't be difficult for them at this point because they've spent time diving into each of these elements beforehand. And now we're coming to the final section of Unit 1, which is titled Readers Retell to Retain the Story. So scholars will first spend 3 days retelling the fiction story. They'll do this in a very specific way and in a specific order as outlined in the potential misconceptions box. To help them do this, they will use a very visual graphic organizer, and in a few moments I'll actually show you where you can find this resource on Blackboard. And lastly, to wrap up the unit, scholars will edit a retell. You'll notice that there is an annotated model lesson for this objective as well. And so now that I've walked you through each section of the unit, we can move on to learning about what is available on Blackboard. So under the Reading tab of the first grade Blackboard page, you'll find a plethora of items from me. What you can find is pretty clearly labeled. You have your unit at a glance and unit previews, annotated model lessons, a resource bank, artifacts, office hours. In my unit at a glance, you probably noticed images under each objective. And so these are anchor charts that I've actually created, and those can be found in the resource bank along with the graphic organizer I use for retelling. I strongly encourage you to dive into each of these folders, especially throughout the year, because more and more will be added to them as the year progresses. So I know that this has been a lot of information to process, and if you have any questions, here is my contact information. I'm really looking forward to another new aspect of the CTO role, office hours. I will host a bi-weekly Skype call where I can check in with my fellow reading planners and we can support one another. However, you certainly don't need to wait on office hours. Reach out at any time, and please, please don't suffer in silence. Let's have a great year of collaboration and talk to you later. Bye.